Welcome back to I Mix What I Like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. All right, so I just saw one battle after another, and much more needs to be said about this film, the politics in the film. Much more, I'm sure, will be said about the film and the politics in the film. What I'm about to do here is not a commentary on the quality of the acting, the writing, the cinematography. Some of it I actually enjoyed in terms of the acting. I like some of the people involved in the film. I like Regina Hall a lot for some reason in this film. I like her in general, but for some reason I like her a lot in this film. Benicio del Toro I like in the film, and one day I hope we can all come back to talk about not only more about him, but his portrayal of Che. Something I keep meaning to come back to and talk about one day, but I'd like to talk more about that. But I enjoy it. Sean Penn, been a fan of his since I was a kid. I think he's a great actor, despite some of his choices of film, and I'm not commenting on anything about any of these folks in terms of what their off-screen life is like. Tiana Taylor, I don't know much about her. It seems like she could have a career in acting in addition to everything else that she's into. I would hate to see her show up in more roles like this. That would be for sure. DiCaprio, of course, has been in a lot of good films over the years. And again, I'm not commenting on anything about his off-camera life. Something I'll come back to in a few minutes, the disrespectful lampooning of revolutionary struggle. What I am actually most interested in saying something about is the depiction of mixed race biraciality in the film, particularly expressing in some way a reference to the experience of those of us with a black parent, a black American parent, and a white American parent here in the United States. So that's the particular mixture I'm focused on. I think it is a particular experience, has a particular history, unlike other so-called mixtures. But in the context of this country, especially, that has its own particular history, and one that I think is played and preyed upon in this film, and something I wanted to say something about, given my own biased relationship to that experience, of course. So while I don't like words like biracial, multiracial, mixed, mulatto, mulatta, zebra, Oreo, mixed nuts, all of the different things I've heard in my lifetime, I also recognize that there is a particular propagandized and socio-historical, economic, class, racial history attached to that. I also recognize that the experience of those of us who are so-called biracial, et cetera, is also taking place in the context of a colonized construction of race and all the confusion that comes with that. In other words, the idea that we are especially confused amidst communities that are themselves whole and totally sane and well constructed themselves around these issues is part of the fabrication and the mythology as well. There's a lot of trauma and disturbance around racialization and categorizing, all of which is happening again in the context of enslavement, colonization, and white supremacy. But given the particular history of mixed race folks here in this country, I think it's important to note and point out when, as is the case in this film, there's clearly an effort and a framing and an attempt to among other things, disassociate those of us with black parentage from black communities and, more importantly, black liberation struggles. And then we end up, as we do in the film like this, with the experience being distilled through the lens and the framing of various white men and, of course, a white filmmaker who is himself married to a woman of so-called mixed race background, Maya Rudolph herself. So in a kind of weird way, like I feel like with these Jordan Peele films, I'm very much interested, and maybe we'll one day look into it beyond this video and this discussion, the off-the-record personal exchanges and discussions that these folks have with their loved ones off camera, because what appears on camera to me just exudes disturbing trauma and confusion and apolitical liberalization and anti-blackness. So okay. Before proceeding, I do just want to shout out this book here, Cedric J. Robinson, on Racial Capitalism, Black Internationalism, and Cultures of Resistance, edited by H.L.T. Kwan, because as I've been in the background slowly wanting to build to having more to say competently on my own thoughts on the popular portrayal of interracial relationships and mixed race experiences, so on and so forth. This is one of the readings I've been referring back to. And I'm not going to do it justice here, but I just want to explain a little bit of how I'm situating my own approach to this film, which is very much influenced by this book here. And in particular, this chapter 18, The Mulatta on Film, From Hollywood to the Mexican Revolution, with Luz Maria Cabral. Again, I'm not a fan of words like mulatto and mulatta. I'm aware of their disturbing history and anti-black and dehumanizing history. But the title of this chapter is again where I'm coming from, and the history that the chapter talks about is where I'm coming from in terms of how I'm seeing and framing my criticism of one battle after another. So just quickly, what I really like about what Robinson and Cabral do in this piece is, again, talk about the history of the so-called mulatto or mulatta in the context of the political economy of colonization, slavery, and white supremacy. It makes reference and points to the socially constructed nature of all of these racial categories, and then their politicization and propagation in film in particular. As they write here, if the legal codes, prosecutions, and trials hedging mixed race persons and marriages are any measure, the mulatto has constituted a threat to North American racial hierarchy, property, and authority for more than 300 years. By the end of the 17th century, then, the mulatto had come to signify an abominable spiritual contamination, as well as the spurious violation of the boundaries between property and human identity. Whiteness, the new term of self-identification, was non-negotiable. And we see that, of course, play out in this film through Sean Penn's character most directly, but I think in subtle ways through DiCaprio's as well, that play upon the, again, socially constructed racial definition of Chase Infinity's character, who is Sean Penn's biological daughter, but DiCaprio's de facto daughter through a stepfather, familial, and the experience of being raised by DiCaprio as opposed to Sean Penn. In the 3 decades prior to the Civil War, the propaganda wars between supporters of slavery and the abolitionists produced 3 enduring black signs: the mulatta and the mulatto, the tom and the buck. Paradoxically, despite its later appropriation by the incipient American film industry as a sign of the anti-Negro cinema, the origins of the mulatto were in the abolitionist camp. From Richard Hildreth's novel The Slave, 1836, to Dion Boucault's The Octoroon, or Life in Louisiana, an 1859 dramatization of Captain Mayne Reid's romance The Quadroon, or A Lover's Adventures in Louisiana, 1856, dozens of novels and plays centered around the mixed-race figure who served as a fictive chiaroscuro through which the tragedy of slavery could be sentimentally experienced by white readers and play goers. And again, chiaroscuro, the treatment of light and shade in drawing and painting, an effect of contrasted light and shadow created by light falling unevenly or from a particular direction on something. Obviously, the mixed race figure is the chiaroscuro, or the fictive play, the depiction of the interplay between light and dark. But the point I'm getting at here, that I'm taking from this chapter, at least for now, is there has been a long history of pop culture, film, and its predecessors, the play and the novel, in producing a very white supremacist approach to the role that the so-called mulatta plays in a society such as this. In the antebellum period, the control over the figure of the mulatto was clearly won by the abolitionists, but following the Civil War and the defeat of Reconstruction, racists would revive their claim to the mulatto as an icon of propaganda. Driven by the cultural movement to replace the historical slave South with a mythical Old South, racists preferred the moral and sexual guilt they associated with the mulatto from the white males to black women. They proclaimed in press, novels, plays, histories, and the popular magazines that the mulatto appeared as a result of white males being submerged in the society of hypersexual and seductive black women. Now, of course, we see this right out the gate in this film. This unnecessarily and over hypersexualization of Tiana Taylor's character, who, as Sean Penn's character says in the film, especially at the end, is basically overwhelmed him with her hypersexuality and tricked him into becoming impregnated with his biological and unclean, impure daughter. That made him, of course, unclean and impure by dirtying himself by entering this black woman, even though he claimed that he was forced to it. Now, I think it's important to note that both Sean Penn, the conservative militarist, white supremacist, and Leo DiCaprio, who's supposed to be the white liberal ally and revolutionary, both proclaim in the film their specific love and affinity for black women, which I think is important because it's not that they met and fell in love with a particular black woman. It's not that they have a particular affinity for black communities, black liberation, black politics, culture, experience. It's that they have this fetish for the hypersexualized black woman. And then you see in the scenes that Taylor has with Sean Penn at the beginning and DiCaprio, they're hypersexualized. We see a lot of tongue. We have to sit through and endure seeing Sean Penn forced to maintain an erection under Taylor's guard and command. We're forced to see her use her hypersexuality to free herself from Sean Penn and her potential capture at that point. And all of this ends up being used through Chase Infinity's character to display this country's and white men and white man's, in the capitalized parlance of Orasami Burton's Tip of the Spear, view of black womanhood, blackness, and so-called mixed race offspring and children. So in a society that Cabral and Robinson write about historically, and as is the case today, in short, blacks were envisioned both as a persistent threat to the stability of an exploitative social order and as a politically convenient symbolic representation of the other in American culture. We see that again in this film, and by extension, this is carried out through the so-called mixed race experience of Chase Infinity's character. And somewhere, given what Cabral and Robinson say here in terms of the history of white liberalism and abolitionism, and specifically the historical figure Thaddeus Stevens, who was seen as one of the more white liberal proponents of abolition, but also had this relationship with his mulatto housekeeper, Lydia Hamilton Smith, and they were probably, it says here, lovers, I think plays out again through the filmmaker Paul Thomas Anderson and his relationship with Maya Rudolph and their child or children. I'm not entirely sure how many they have, but I think but it seems to me that it's some whatever is going on in Anderson's personal life is being depicted in this film. And as is often the case with these commercial media product, this Warner Brothers, if I'm not mistaken, product in this case, this Warner Brothers product, we get yet another distillation of white male fantasy and trauma and concern over this constant potential threat of the black community, this constant fetishization of black women's hypersexuality, and then the offspring that those hypersexual black women force these white men to create, producing what we see in this film. And I did read one or another review, an article about the film, where Anderson's private life is talked about a little bit and raised as a potential backdrop for the film. I don't know to what extent this is actually brought up and covered elsewhere, but it seems to be playing out quite well, quite clearly in this film for sure. And I think, as is the case with most depictions of blackness and biraciality in commercial product, shout out to the Vernon philosophy, we get a version of it that is of no use, and again is distilled through white male liberal / conservatism, coloniality, and their own racial trauma. So I wanted to say that you know, there's a joke in here that Paul Thomas Anderson is the modern day Thaddeus Stevens, and we're getting the same kind of liberalized approach to the topic of interracial relationships and mixed race multiraciality as a result. And then something I think is also happening here where Cabral and Robinson in this chapter are talking about Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffith's film, and the character of Stoneman, and then they compare him in white liberality to Thaddeus Stevens, and say here, as a predecessor of the 20th century white liberals, Stevens / Stoneman exhibits the disastrous consequences that flow inevitably from a coalition with the congenitally unstable mulatto or mulatta. And in One Battle After Another, we definitely see that again, where the conservative played by Sean Penn and the liberal played by DiCaprio are in this tete-a-tete indirect struggle with one another, which I think reflects clearly the bifurcation felt, or the split, or the internal struggle that white men feel in this country, being so attracted to fetishizing black womanhood and blackness in particular, not only just sexually through women, but culture and performance and style and knowledge and wisdom. But this internal struggle that white man is having, that white empire is having, over how to engage the savage and what becomes of the offspring produced. And in both cases in the film, Sean Penn didn't want his mixed race child. He doesn't want her. And DiCaprio didn't want her in the way that he ends up with her in the film, where her black mother abandons them and leaves him pleading with her to help him raise this child that he doesn't really want. And then we see for the rest of his that he's not ready for, and that he spends the rest of his life and her childhood drinking and drugging himself into being apart from, being distant from, being unavailable to her. That they are themselves experiencing the consequences from being in coalition with the congenitally unstable mulatta. And I admit I hated that part. It spoke very much to my own personal experience of being raised on the mythology of raised with and on the mythology of the absent black parent. But the film doesn't properly contextualize that. And then, of course, again, we never see this in the context of a white person and a black person meeting one another, falling in love romantically, politically, et cetera, and so forth, and that experience being investigated outside the lens, or at least the centering, of white male coloniality and or empire. We don't get those stories. It's always, as Robinson and Cabral were talking about in their chapter, it's often the tragic nature of that relationship and the offspring. So this history of the tragic mulatto is less about the experience of the so-called mixed person, but the tragedy imposed on white man civilization by having to be involved with this congenitally unstable offspring produced by the congenitally unstable hostility of empire, colonization, and enslavement of Africans. So I love that Chase Infinity, and again, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, I love that her character is strong and she fights back and she struggles and she's not some weak, soft punk, whatever. I love that we get to see her shoot and kill the white male assailant attempted to re-enslave her, and she fights and struggles. Which, I mean, I love all of that. I'm happy to see all of that, but I would love to see it outside of the context of some ramped up, silly thriller, as opposed to within the context of a black liberation struggle. And I don't like how the film depicts her seemingly to have constant hostility with the black community. Her black mother abandons her. There are no black men, other than the very brief cameo of Wood Harris's character, and who is himself in an interracial relationship with a white Jew, as she's depicted in the film, at least. But we don't get we don't get anything from that experience. We don't get anything about their relationship. We don't see anything. We just see that they're romantically involved. We don't see it. We have no context. There's no discussion. There's nothing investigated in that. It's just presented as existing. But as far as Chase Infinity's character, there is no black male presence. There's no black community presence. Her black mother abandons her. The black community of nuns that she's taken to for hiding is very hostile to her. And yes, it's depicted in part because her mother is said to be a snitch, but there's no discussion or invitation to Chase to reconnect with her black family and her black community and her blackness itself, because again, the film is depicting this through the lens of the white male struggling with his own internal conflict of fetishizing black women, and having the congenitally unstable offspring as a result. I wrote here, and I made a note here, that the pretense of politics in the film is more about white man's struggle with race mixing and white conscience than anything political. So vague references to capitalism and exploitation, it just is left as silly. It's lampooned through Taylor's revolutionary violence, and even the reference in the film to the phrase revolutionary violence. And because of the discussion that I felt was borderline disrespectful of millennials and killing capitalism about Pam Grier, I made a note here as I was watching the film, is Tiana Taylor meant to be the new Pam Grier in this film? The hypersexual, lampoonish, performative, violent, revolutionary, and all this other kind of stuff. I was like, is that what they're doing here? The silliness of the black woman character, Jungle Pussy, and the black cop that's talking that she's talking trash to, but we get no plan and no politics. We just get her shouting, "This is what black power looks like." So it's a very white male fantasy of what black power means and inspires in terms of fear or hypersexuality. We get allusions to revolutionary history and politics through Gil Scott-Heron's "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised" being used as code, which one part I did laugh at is that there's a scene where they're discussing the forms of mixture, and the question is asked, which mix? Speaking to my point about the particulars of black, white, as opposed to other forms of mixture. Big shout out, given my own history with the movement, brief as it was, to low power radio and media, and the value of having non-internet based communicative networks to radical politics. I did appreciate the salute and shout to that. But I don't like the way that Chase Infinity's character is again entirely removed from the black community, removed from black struggle. The context of mixed race experience is devoid of those politics and history. And then of course she's in the end saved by a white man in DiCaprio's character, and she's happy to be reconnected with him and to go back to their, albeit non-biological, familial father-daughter relationship. And the film literally ends with Tom Petty's American Girl, as if to say, as the song says, she was an American girl. So we're just bringing her back, like her humanity is stored after being saved by her white putative father. She's restored to her American Girl, and everything, the credits roll, and it's supposed to be a happy ending. It reminds me again of this new book that I'm just starting to read and want to continue to encourage and talk more about going forward. Total Market American: Race, Data, and Advertising by Marcel Rosas-Salas. Because in there, where she's again talking about how we are all made into genres and categories racially, and these categories being based in the history of empire, imperialism, colonization, and enslavement are used to this day to market to us products and ideology. This film does something similar by removing Chase Infinity's character from blackness and black liberation and black politics and the black community entirely. And even given the way I just described Tom Petty's American Girl being used as a closing outro song, and the way the story unfolds. It's very much what Rosa Salas says about the core target audience in this country always being white and white affluent audiences. That films like this are meant to assuage and reaffirm the colonial superiority of whiteness and in this case, all the internal struggles of whiteness and white man's engagement with black womanhood and biraciality. So the removal of Chase Infinity from the black community, black politics, and black struggle is meant to do what Rosa Salas is talking about in her book around the categorization, racialization, and the targeting of advertising and promotion that is wanting, again, this dominant white audience to want to see the film, want to engage, want to walk away feeling somewhat reaffirmed. So the idea of a black community, of a black family, of a black struggle cannot be the target, cannot be that audience, and that politics cannot be the target in films like these, and these first cinema films. So that's why we end up getting what we get with the conservative and liberal fetishization of black womanhood and blackness and multiraciality, and the white male savior still coming out at the end, this drunken, stoned, disaffected former ally revolutionary still, walks off heroically and is still reaffirmed because, maybe Anderson in his own filmmaking is wanting to reaffirm his own personal life and that of those like him in this society with their variations of interracial relationships and families. So again, my point here is not even to criticize the specifics of the film and the filmmaking, or the specifics in terms of people's choices, their romantic involvements, their engagements, their self-identities. I'm not criticizing any of that. I am looking to be critical of how those are politicized and deployed in this society, and to what end. I don't think we who are mixed are any more confused than those who claim to be 100% of one or another, a background. All of these are constructs with their various forms of trauma and colonial-inspired, imperial-inspired confusion. And I'm not also saying that people who engage in interracial relationships are de facto enemies and producing de facto enemies and snitches and et cetera and so forth. I am, however, very critical of the politics attached to these relationships in pop culture and in films like these, where the idea and the concept of an entirely black family or an entirely conscious black community engaged in some sort of political struggle is anathema to pop culture, to the world of advertising, marketing, psychological warfare, et cetera, and so forth, where there is an encouragement that those of us with mixed race backgrounds find our place with our white parents and families, as opposed to black families in need of solidarity and more liberatory action and involvement. It is also a disrespect to those of us with an experience where black communities have not abandoned us and left us to fend for ourselves, struggling in, as this film depicts, the variations between white male liberals and white male conservatives. Of the many things wrong with this film and its politics, its approach to the so-called mulatta is quite consistent with as Cabral and Robinson point out in their work, the history of this country's relationship to Africanity, blackness, and multiracial depiction. All right, more to come on this film and many others, of course. So please do like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon if you can, even joining just for free. I will, of course, also see you over there on Black Liberation Media, and big salute to all of our associated satellite comrades as well. And as always, peace, only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say, and I'll catch you next time here at I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.